This is another permaculture video game development update, and as you see, all I'm doing is moving from one screen to the next to make it to ultimately the objective, which is to get into the permit office. Alright, this is a tour of the code. I'm starting with the comment of east, representing the beginning of all of the code for eastward movement for the sprite. And what I have done is I'm trying to solve the problem of there being a 2D JavaScript game platform that's scrolling to the right. However, I'm doing it in such a way to where there isn't just this long map that you can track the position along. I'm actually creating an illusion of replicating the same main left to right, same frame, and then having it so that when you get to the eastern or right edge of the screen, you actually start over at the beginning of the screen, but the objects in that frame are gonna shift so that you have the sense that you've passed something or that you're approaching something. And so that's the way I'm solving this problem and working around it. So the way the code is working here, now moving on to the conditional statement here. So yes, as you press the corresponding key that moves the sprite to the right, then the x coordinate of the sprite is incremented by 10, and then I created a separate metric to track the distance continuously of all of that positive motion to the right of the x. The character or the sprite can move backwards and forwards, so there's a bit of a noise in that distance number in terms of backtracking, but generally speaking, it's going to produce this approximation of how many scrolling screen frames have been traversed by the sprite. And that distance number then, once it gets to, let's say, 2 times or 5 times, then something can occur which represents the end of the level. So let's move forward and show the code of what's going to happen at the end of the level, which is, in this case, a permit office is going to appear, assuming you survived the gauntlet of cops trying to get bribes from you on your way to do the right thing and be a law-abiding citizen and pay for your permits. You had to escape and evade a number of cops trying to get bribes from you. But if you made it through for this testing purposes, it's just 2 frames, but it'll be probably 5 frames in the real game. Then what happens is this function occurs that starts out with starting with this comment start permit office, and then you have a set interval in order to loop this every half second so it can test these conditions and fire off these functions. So what happens is it's testing to see if the distance, which is how many frames basically your sprite has gone, is it greater or equal to width representing the user's screen width, so that it's a dynamic number, not a fixed number. So if the distance traversed by the sprite is greater or equal to the screen width times 2, which means you've traveled at least 2 frames, and then the minus 500 is just to account for a bit of a delay so that it appears on time. And then after that, you get just the basic mechanics of having a sort of latent object that's an image file that's hidden on page load. It then appears where you want it, and at the size that you want it. So that was my way of a workaround for not having a sort of mapping metric. And I did try doing a timing method, but that had its faults because someone could just sit there and wait, and then the timeout would happen, and then they would get to the end of the game or get to the end of the level just by standing in one place and waiting. So I realized this was a better way to do it, to have some approximation of just the time it takes, or sorry, some approximation of how many frames roughly have been traversed before you don't have to go through anymore.